Hi everybody, we're back with another watercolor video here. This is just a simple winter stream without any snow. Before we get into too much into the video, I wanted to suggest that you subscribe. It really helps me out, and share the video if you know somebody that'd like to see it. Visit my website, christopherleeper.com. I have a new watercolor book that just came out. I also offer online Zoom classes, watercolor classes, groups, and private sessions. So there's information on the website if you're interested in that. So this painting is pretty, it's not a real exciting subject, but I did like the combination of warms and cools, and so this is my palette, and what we're going to be using today is pretty much a primary palette: red, yellow, blue. The colors are Da Vinci, Daniel Smith, Van Dyke Brown is Rembrandt, and the magenta is Michael Harding. So starting out is a wet into wet that most of the time, I'd say probably about 75% of the time, I'll start off a painting with a big wet into wet. Sometimes the entire painting, and in this case just a section. And one of the reasons is it gives you a chance to move color around. It's a very efficient way to move color across your paper. It also is a good way to build variety into a section without having lots of edges, when you work just on dry paper. And so what I mixed up on the palette was a variety of colors, from tans to rust, violets, blues. So what this does is sets up a harmony in the painting, and especially in those shapes that you're filling in, and allows you to build on that. And so oftentimes I will do the entire painting like this, knowing that I'm going to come back in, I'm going to cut edges in on dry paper, and so it's not as scary as it sounds. I know sometimes when you're first using watercolor, big wet into wet seem a little overwhelming. This this subject had some, the background was interesting with all the trees and the saplings and stuff, and there were some of the trees were really light where the light was hitting them, and I thought about maybe using masking fluid to mask those off, and I decided that probably would be too harsh. Those shapes, those edges would be too harsh. So what I'm doing is just taking a wet brush through the wet into wet and just lifting some of the excess color, and leaving a bit of a lighter shape that I think would work for what I want to do, because I'm going to cut in around them anyways, and so there was no sense in creating a lot of high contrast. One of the things about this subject that I liked was these moss covered rocks that are these green rocks that are in the foreground. I thought those were pretty cool. So that's just a simple wash of Hansa yellow and cobalt. So the water has a lot of colors in it, and so I want to see that on my palette before I go, just like any area. And so I'm mixing these up, and you see they're sliding colors, meaning that they're not just isolated puddles from one another. One blends into another, into another, into another, just the way they would in my painting. And so if I can see it on the palette, I can kind of visualize it on the palette before I put it onto the paper. And so that's most of the color mixing that I do resembles that, where it has a lot of variety, and they just blend right into one another. I started this shape, the stream shape, with some wet into wet, and I pre-wet some of it because I was worried that it's a pretty big shape to cover, and as I get to the bottom there, it's a lot of reverse painting. I'm coming back in around those rocks. So when you're reverse painting, you're slowing down, and so I want this to all be one continuous shape, right? The water should go right up from the bottom to the top of the painting, and so what that does is it buys me some time. And so when I'm putting down watercolor onto paper, as soon as your brush touches that paper, if you don't do anything with it, then that mark will be there, with the edges. And so what eventually you get is you either get a live edge or a dead edge. And a dead edge is one that's dried, and you have to deal with that. You have to deal with whether you can soften it or maybe you can't. A live edge means I can come, paint up to it and get it absorbed right into that wash. And so by doing some wet into wet, I'm buying myself time to work on this water. When things slow down below, when I start having to do a lot of reverse painting up around these rocks, the rest of my stream wash will have stayed wet, or hopefully stayed wet. And so that's the reason for doing that. You could probably do it just on dry paper, but you'd have to really move fast, and I really didn't want to create more edges than I needed. And so now you see, now down here, this is all dry, and it looks like I'm going really fast because I sped up the video, but I'm not. I'm taking my time to try to create good shapes. I noticed right around now, though, that this big wash at the top was starting to dry, and so I was afraid I was going to start getting blossoms when I put my brush into it, because I'd be putting water, a brush stroke that's wetter than the surface. And so you can see those little speckles there. I've taken a spray bottle and I've misted that wash to try to keep it open longer, so that from the bottom is dry. And so the idea was that I would keep that top wash open, do my reverse painting around the rocks, and just sort of the two would meet together, and it would end up being one wash. And so it worked out pretty well, and so that was the thinking there of trying to get using basically wet and dry techniques. So the shadows, I think, is kind of the narrative of the painting to me. I love the shadows, the way they come across the water. I guess my reservation was, how dark should they be? And so you'll see in this video that I'll probably go back. I hit them maybe 3 or 4 times before I finally get the value change that I like. I wanted this blue to pop out, because I think that's, as far as the color combinations, that's a really nice to have those oranges against the blue. I think that always looks nice, a nice complementary pair. And so this wash has stayed wet. I'm able to keep going back in it. There's a certain area there in the middle by that rock that needs to be lighter. So, and this is the beauty of this having Waterford, is it allows you to lift some of this off. So I've gone back with a wet brush, go back and then take a paper towel and lift some of that color off. Even on some of those washes where I'm starting to get some edges, I'm able to sort of reactivate that edge and open that up again. So here we go, hitting those shadows again. The colors, I really like how that blue and that rust sort of work together. I think that's kind of the theme that you notice. It's in the background, it's in the water, and so it repeats itself over and over again. This is the second pass for the background, and pretty much the same color mixes. I've added a little Van Dyke brown to make some darker values, but the one thing I want you to notice is that it's about the same colors, except it's less water. And so these washes need to sit up on the surface. They need to dry a little darker, not as light as those first washes, which we're going to dry light because of the wet into wet. Anytime that you paint into wet paper, your wash is going to dry lighter. The brush I'm using is important. It's a 1/2 inch flat. It's a silver brush black velvet, which is a squirrel hair and synthetic mix. But with flat brushes, they don't hold a lot of paint, and so I love this brush especially for like textures. And so I load the brush, make a mark, which is a real nice clean juicy mark, and that's pretty much it. It runs the paint right out of the brush, and then I'll move that brush and drag it and get some of these dry brush effects. And so that gives me, it's a great way for me to build texture into areas. And so the woods back there, I don't want it to be real super tight. We have a lot of high contrast, sharp edges in the foreground with these rocks. So I wanted the background to be a little bit looser, kind of messy, typical type of woods type of thing. This is the first wash of darker value, and it's pretty much my standard, which is Van Dyke brown, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, Van Dyke brown. I've added some magenta and then some cobalt blue for where it's going to be, where these darks are going to be bluer. I know that this is my first darker value, but it's not going to be the darkest that I'm going to get in there, because it's going to dry a little bit lighter. And so it basically is setting up the shadows and the darks. So there's, even within the dark, you can find color. And so it's not, you notice that I didn't mix up just one dark value of just say blue and brown. There was, I've used some magenta, I've used a couple blues. The phthalo blue gives you something a little different. The ultramarine blue gives you something a little different. And so it sets up for the darkest stuff that's yet to come. And so this is, the reverse painting is still going on down around these rocks. So it's, obviously it's sped up, but I'm trying to really take my time. I've done hopefully a complete enough drawing so I kind of have a guideline or an idea where I want to go. And I love the blue. Any of the blues that, like what I'm putting in there, is probably mostly cobalt blue with maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue. The darks that are on the opposite bank are really important because they're actually showing you the form. And so I'm really taking my time to try to pick out those shadows along those edges, because those are going to describe those rocks on the other side. So we're still doing shadows. We're coming back. We're hitting this again. This is mostly, it's probably just cobalt blue and a little bit of ultramarine. And I wasn't completely sure how dense I wanted those shadows, because I really wanted them to sort of sit up on the surface. And so now I switched over to a round brush, but not real loaded, something that I can move kind of quickly and drag across the surface and get a nice broken dry brush edge. And that way I don't create something that's too formal, too edgy, and will still sort of merge into the wet into wet that I did earlier. And so like I said, now I'm feeling pretty good that I can see this. I can see how dark that's going to be, and I'm comfortable now with with how it reads. So these are the probably the darkest values in the painting right now, and obviously critical to get a dynamic value range. Same mixes as before, except much less water. If you have trouble with your darks being too light, oftentimes you might not have fresh color. That makes a huge difference to have fresh color in your palette. If your color's older, you got to use too much water to generate enough pigment, and so you never get the pigment load in your washes that you need. You can't have it globbed on. That's going to be too heavy. So there's a kind of a fine line of adding enough water so that it flows off your brush, so it's still a nice dynamic wash, and then having something that's dark enough. So we get the foreground pretty well put away, and then we move on to these trees. In the reference, that there is that bent tree there, and now that I'm looking at it, I kind of wish I had made it straight, but that's kind of like every watercolor, right? I mean, there's always something that bugs you with it. So I'm using the flat brush, and you notice sometimes I'll push it right along its side, because that creates some interesting marks and textures, or I'll use it on the short side to make more linear marks. All of the tree limbs and the brush and stuff are put in with one of those, it's like a Japanese calligraphy brush. I'm not even sure what you'd call it. It's goat hair. They're real inexpensive, and they make such nice expressive marks. It'd be equivalent of a rigger or a script liner. So at this stage, it's pretty much the end game for the painting. I'm taking a lot of time in between sections, just sitting there looking at trying what I need to do. Many times at the end of my paintings, I'll take a little titanium white gouache and mix it with some watercolor, and usually it's there's two main mixes. One would be like a tan color for highlights, and then one would be cobalt blue mixed with the titanium white to get a little bit of a real soft blue. And I think those little accents, I'm a fan of Sargent. You'd always see those kind of little marks in a Sargent painting. I like the contrast between opaque and transparent, and I don't know, I think it adds a lot of energy to a painting. And so in this, you'll see my signature pop up, and at that point I thought I was done, and I really wasn't done. I just sat there and I kept seeing things, and so like even there, I added a little bit of opaque white to the cobalt blue to try to make that blue get a little more luminous, and then it's just a matter of a few highlights, and these little touches with the white are, you could scrape those out, or you can, in my case I'm just using a little bit of white gouache, but I think that gives it a lot of energy on the surface where the light is sort of raking across those rocks. So I was pretty happy with that, knocking that tree back so it's not quite as dark, and just adding a few simple trees there, and pulling it all together. So that's the painting. I thank you guys for taking the time to watch it, and again, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see each other again. I'll have another video coming up soon, and thank you.